At scaleupmastery.com, we seek to empower business owners wanting to scale their businesses by providing them helpful content from the perspectives of the right mindsets, skill sets, and tool sets. Today we have with us co-founder of Theco Consulting, Mr. Chua Tianhao, who is an entrepreneur as well as a TEDx speaker and former management consultant at a firm founded by Michael Porter. Tianhao also co-founded an F&B company in Myanmar and spearheaded the successful expansion of 2 bubble tea brands, 1 pizza brand, and 1 Mookata restaurant to over 40 outlets within a short span of 3 years and managing a team of over 200 employees. Today, Tianhao is here to share with us how he has managed to leverage his consulting and entrepreneurial experience to help other entrepreneurs grow their businesses using resilient, battle-tested strategies honed in the crucible of real-world entrepreneurship. Welcome, Tianhao.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So happy that you managed to take the time to be with us. As a battle-tested business owner yourself who has fought in the trenches with your team in one of the most challenging of times of COVID, and also in one of the most challenging territories to emerge successful as an entrepreneur. On hindsight, what do you think were the top 3 principles or practices that served you the best?
I think it's a mix of different factors, but if I really have to nail down to 3, I would be saying the following 3. So the first is the ability to stay resilient, which means essentially I need to be forward thinking, to try and expect what kind of scenario and challenges will be happen, and then make plans accordingly, rather than waiting for it to happen before executing. Number 2 will be the ability to try and scale up, but at the same time, during the scaling up, to build a foundation. There is a strong foundation. So ensuring that we are sustainable in terms of our operation, financial, and legally. And the last will be more about the positive management of different stakeholders, especially between the partners and the employees, and potentially our supplier, which is very crucial in the F&B games. So I think these 3 are the top factors that allow us to be nimble and be able to grow swiftly despite all the challenges in Myanmar.
You obviously mentioned these 3 principles and practices for a reason. Are there any examples that you could share with the audience listening in?
So initially, we were very focused on just having a bubble tea shop. But unfortunately, with the continuous currency depreciation, our COGS raised from like 30% to a very unmanageable of over 50% for bubble tea chain. So because of that, we had to keep on thinking, because we already trying to cut down all the possible causes already. So instead, we launched a second brand. From the beginning, we planned for it, assuming that the currency will continue to depreciate. And with that, we plan on a franchise expansion route. So that allowed us to keep our overall company COGS low. And even with that, it wasn't sufficient. So we thought of, instead of having to earn a few $100 at every outlet every day, we went to plan on a Mookata buffet restaurant concept. So this allowed us, the reason for Mookata buffet, because number 1, Mookata means that essentially it's not a chef-driven businesses. It's one that is determined more by COGS. And with the current Myanmar situation, a lot of chefs and young people are trying to flock the country. So we didn't want a situation where we are caught, where we are chef focused, and when this chef left, the whole company or the whole restaurant will collapse. That's why we do a Mookata. And number 2, why buffet? Because we thought that since COGS is going to be so high, we rather do a buffet. We rather just have a high COGS. But at the same time, we try and maintain within a certain 55 to 60% COGS level. And because it's a buffet, so we want to target the middle class segment to still come. So every shop, we can sort of increase our value by multiples. So the example that I shared is a bit of combination of the first 2 factors, where it's about forward thinking, trying to know what were the trends that is happening in the country. But at the same time, we are scaling up but with a solid foundation. Because in our case, since the HR and we already have a HR team, we already have a marketing team, so our foundation is quite okay. And we already have implemented an ERP system called Odoo. So because of a strong foundation, we are able to scale up, but in a very logical way and in a more resilient way. So I guess this is an example of how we leverage two of the three principles in the business.
So you mentioned the three principles and practices that you use, which are like resilience, scaling up practices, as well as the positive management of your stakeholders, right? Whether they are your shareholders or vendors or just other partners. Is this something that is unique to your business only, or are these principles transferable to other entrepreneurs?
I'm actually helping some of my clients in very different, diverse industry to be applying these principles, and it actually shows impact. So I believe that these are actually very general because like trying to be building a business for more resilience, especially in today's context where we are sort of expecting that the economy will have a downturn, or in terms of trying to scale up. Because this scalability part need not be about F&B. It can be very general for anything. And of course, the positive management of stakeholders is something that is very general. Like, for example, I always advise my clients that actually having a partnership, finding the right partner in terms of complementary skill and the right value is actually highly critical. And this part is actually something that can be applied across different industry. So to sum it up, I think it's something that is actually very transferable across different industry, and actually anyone can practice as long as they are aware of it and they are conscious of it.
Would you care to give us some examples of some of the industries or sectors that you have worked with so far?
Let me share a specific example where I had a client who was doing counseling. She's a psychologist and she was doing a counseling business. But at the same time, she also went a bit into the special needs training. So we actually combine these two businesses together, find a foundation of an intangible asset of the company, the principle, the methodology that make both parts of the business works. And together with these two, we sort of found a way for her to scale up into other businesses, including corporate training. It may not just be all these high-level businesses. So we also have an example where it's someone that was actually operating 4 hawker store. Yeah, it's really at the Singapore Hawker Center, 4 hawker store. So very naturally, he reached a plateau about how to expand out because as you know that for hawkers, usually NEA require that the owner is at the shop. So we actually found a way for it to expand, taking a small step to go towards a bit more distribution of a different ingredient that is very similar to his core. And with that, he can actually try and take a outlet instead of the hawker, it's actually at the market. Yeah, doing a bit of distribution of ingredient, not exactly the same, but relying on the same ingredient. So all this scalability, taking small steps to scale up, actually help this diverse industry to be able to expand out.
That's great. So you don't have to be a very big and corporate company, but actually, as long as you're a business owner, they can avail your services easily.
Yes, correct. Yeah, it applies to any scale of businesses and any industry. As long as the mindset is there, the principle is being applied.
You just mentioned mindset. I think this is a great segue because I wanted to explore with you if you think it's the mindset or the skill set that separates entrepreneurs who make it and those who don't.
Honestly, I think it's a combination of both mindset and skill set. Both are actually equally important. But across the general industry, mindset, maybe first I will speak about the mindset because having the positive and the correct mindset actually helps to overcome challenges. In the entrepreneurship, every day when you wake up, there are always challenges. If without the right mindset and we just purely the right skill, it's definitely not sufficient because that is actually the one that helps you to wake up in the morning. That is actually the one that potentially provides the motivation to encounter all these challenges. So if let's say you just have all the right skill set, but without a positive mindset of wanting to overcome the challenges, of wanting a positive motivation, it's very hard to solve all the issues that you face every day.
So in your practice, when you coach your clients, do you have a philosophy or methodology that you work with to help your clients achieve their goals?
This methodology actually stems from the three principles that I mentioned just now. But I try to be innovative and I term it in terms of something that I call G.P.S. Yeah, I mean, when we are navigating our vehicle, we need a G.P.S. So similarly, when we are navigating our business, it will be good to have a G.P.S. to help us to navigate better. So in this case, G stands for growth. So having a good analysis of the potential growth option available for the businesses. The P stands for partnership. Because among the stakeholders that I mentioned just now, I personally strongly believe that partnership can actually make or break the business, which is why I specifically take out alphabet P for partnership. It can be within a company where you start, or it can be a partnership when you try to expand overseas, when you're looking for international partner. It needs to be one that is actually complements you in terms of the skill set. And at the same time, is one that you have similar value with you on critical issue. And finally, the S is about sustainable. So this sustainable on top of the usual ESG sustainability that we spoke about is also in terms of making the operationally sustainable and financially sustainable.
So in the last years, right, you have been using these methodologies and you've cut your teeth in entrepreneurship in Myanmar. And like I introduced you earlier, that you fought in the trenches in the most challenging of times and the most challenging of territories. So you obviously face a set of very challenging metrics and business conditions. Now that you have moved your practice to Singapore, for the entrepreneur who is currently operating in Singapore, they obviously face a very different set of challenges from the times that you were in Myanmar working and coaching entrepreneurs. In Singapore, there are challenges like high rental, high labor costs. What would you advise these entrepreneurs and how can they improve their businesses?
Yeah, you're right. Coming back to Singapore, it's a whole different set of challenges. And unfortunately, even with the G.P.S, there is no magic one that can be a one-stop solution for all of them. In terms of rental, I think it's what a lot of businesses are already doing. Let me speak in terms of a very specific F&B, which is actually one of the key sector that is facing a combination of these two issues. I mean, the very general management consultant way is trying to minimize overall rental for the company. And essentially, it just means trying to sort of reallocate your responsibility. So if let's say there are some processes where it can be designate a central kitchen or central place of production and manufacturing hub to do, so that each of the places, a smaller rental can be incurred. Yeah, it's really like what I mentioned, it's no magic one. It's just a very logical step to try and think of the issue. So that's for the rental. The labor part, I think, is something that is a problem that is very common to Singaporean, especially frontline industries such as F&B and retail. Once again, there's no magic one, but it's just a very focus on trying to, I would say, I'll break down the solution into two different parts. The one is understanding and re-looking at the current processes and finding ways that the processes can be simplified so that it can be redesignate in terms of the current workforce, redesignate it. So overall, to make everyone's job easier and potentially to have less people. And the second part of it is very naturally is trying to have automation. For example, for the franchise businesses, I always advise my client to look at 3AMS because with that, you actually can simplify the job of the franchise manager when they are doing the auditing and in terms of managing a franchisee. Yeah, there are many such tools for automation. So finding the right tool for automation can definitely help in terms of leveraging the labor issue. So once again, to sum it up, there is no magic one. Yeah, but it's just taking a very, very scientific and structured approach to looking how to reduce the dependency of labor and at the same time how to reduce the overall rental for the company.
Do you think going overseas is an option And would we be replicating the business that we have here in Singapore identically overseas, or would there be differences? And last question I would ask you would be, how will we know this is the right time to go overseas?
Very naturally, when we expand overseas, we are targeting a whole new market. I mean, one complaint that Singaporean businesses always have is that the Singapore market is very small. The Singapore market is very saturated. That's very easy to reach a plateau for growth. So the expansion for overseas bring unlimited potential, especially when we are just talking about our neighboring Southeast Asia. There are actually unlimited potential in terms of what market size we will reach. So very naturally, growing overseas is a way of scalability that can actually help to make the business more stable while giving it some more growth options. However, going overseas also bring one whole lot of risk factor. Jumping a bit forward, there are ways to mitigate such risks, but very naturally, just even having to allocate some of our mental bandwidth to think about the overseas market is actually a use of our resources, not to mention the potential investment in money that we need to do when overseas. So I think venturing overseas is definitely one viable option, but there are of course some general factors I always encourage my clients to think about. So one of it is of course doing a bit of market research to understand your particular segment to enter into this particular overseas market. Is it really still, I mean, using a very conventional, is this really still a blue ocean or is it a red sea? Yeah, very naturally, most of the things we want to go into, there are already a lot of incumbent competitor inside. But is it something that we are happy to live with? Or is it something that we are able to find a unique value proposition to be competing them? So I think that's one factor that I always ask my clients to do first, do a bit of market research to understand the local landscape before they go in. The second part is very naturally, I mean, even under, if, when you're researching on the market landscape, you can also sort of develop a strategy. So for example, in my own case, when we were trying to venture our bubble tea to Thailand, very naturally everyone will say, Thailand, people love drinking, people love their Thai milk tea, but it's such a competitive market. Everywhere you go, you look at a BTS station, you look at MRT station, you look at the roadside, there are so many drink options. So is this something that you really want to go into? So we did our market research. We think that there's still a gap, but at the same time, we also try and develop a strategy where we don't go in and go straight heads on into the most central Bangkok. We decided to either expand to outside Bangkok or even within Bangkok. We try to expand to areas that is more, they call it a community mall. So maybe around 45 minutes drive from the central Bangkok, where we try and we try to set up our first couple of shops there, understand the market. Then we grow slowly, and once we get stronger and we understand the Thailand market, then we go in. So linking the first two factors of doing a bit of market research and the strategy, I think these are important factors to consider when you're venturing overseas. And very naturally, going back to the P in the G.P.S, the local partner. Finding a strong local partner is so critical. Yeah, I mean, of course, anyone can venture in themselves, but it's always good to have some local partner who understand the local market, and of course, to actually help to pave the way in terms of network. So having some of these factors, when considering some of these factors before really making a decision, will be very helpful when venturing overseas, and that will help to mitigate the risk. Then relative to your second question on the timing, I think there is no one good timing to speak about in terms of the macro factors. But I think internally, the timing will be one that at least within the company, there's already a more solid foundation where things are really ongoing. So for example, we talk about F&B, about retail, there's a bit of sustainability and there's a bit of the franchise or licensing that is being done. So in terms of internal company, there's really some stability already, and there is someone or some resources in the company can be allocated to overseas market. I think that will be a good time. But on the contrary, a bad time will be when the local market is still a mess. Even within Singapore, all the operation are still a mess. There is no one to be doing. The founder himself is still very entrenched in the operation. Then I would think maybe that's really not the right time. So the first step is try to pull the operator, business partner or the operation partner out of the daily operation. Then we can think about international expansion. Yeah, so to sum it up, I think international expansion is always a very lucrative way to try and scale, but naturally it brings a whole set of risks which can be mitigated. And lastly, in terms of the timing, in terms of macro environment, there is no one good optimum time. But in terms of internally, perhaps there is one, it'll be good to grow at a time where internally the company is more stable and there's someone to oversee the international expansion.
So I love what you said about, on a time continuum, there's no absolute timing. Like there's no 2 year, 3 year timing or 3 or 4 outlets sort of thing. But really, if the internal operations and processes and the way the business is already geared for the G.P.S. that you talked about earlier, then that would be the right time. But if they were not ready, then we shouldn't be looking at international expansion at all. So I really love that. Thanks for sharing that with us. Now, I wanted to know, in terms of international expansion, is that part of the services or the coaching that you provide to our Singaporean entrepreneurs?
Honestly, when we started, that wasn't a priority. It was more in terms of general consulting for businesses. But along the way, when we are speaking to businesses, and we realized that our overseas experience was actually very beneficial. Yeah, honestly, it wasn't something that we realized at the beginning. But when we are consulting for our clients who wants to venture overseas, we realized that we were able to provide a lot of perspective that Singaporean businesses who has always been local, who has not expanded overseas might not realize it. So, for example, in terms of how to structure a partnership overseas, because a lot of Singaporean, when they met a potential local partner, they tend to be very attracted towards a very simple joint venture, believing that this actually is the best way to work, to collaborate with the local partner and to tap on their expertise. But we always try to discourage them from that and instead working on the different kind of mode of partnership with them. It can be in terms of a distribution, in terms of franchise, in terms of licensing, so that they are not so that they are not overly reliant on the overseas partner. Yeah, so to answer your question, it is one of the services that we are providing in terms of sharing with them, first of all, our market research, and number two, in terms of how to structure the best way to structure the partnership to try and have a win-win partnership and the same time try to win in the market.
At scaleupmastery.com, we've got business owners not only from Singapore, but actually from the entire region. So for our international partners and clients and audience, are these services that you provide transferable, and would you advise them the same as you would a Singapore company looking to grow?
Oh, the international expansion is definitely very attractive to whatever company in whichever country because it helps you to realize the potential of a new additional market. However, the execution might be slightly different depending on which home country you are at. So, for example, in Singapore, where our home country, our cost of labor is always higher. So, when we expand overseas, we will always try to find a way to leverage on the lower cost of labor overseas. Compared to companies from another country, for example, Myanmar or Malaysia, where the cost of labor is slightly lower. So when you're venturing overseas, in terms of how you find a partner, how you delegate the responsibility divided between your new team and your local team, it might be a bit different. Ultimately, when we spend overseas, you try to gain as much as possible on the high side, which is to leverage on the overseas market. But at the same time, you try and protect your low side. Yeah, so if let's say for Singapore, because our cost of labor is high, it doesn't make sense to try and leverage a Singapore labor to get a revenue from another country. But this is definitely not the case. If I was going to base in Myanmar and expand overseas. So because of the lowest cost of labor over there, I will try and have as much work as possible done in Myanmar to support my overseas operation. So to sum up my answers to your question, International expansion is definitely for everyone in every country. The same principle applies, but in terms of the execution, there might be a bit of differences.
So growth is for everyone. It's just that the perspectives need to be relevant to the home-based country as well as the targeted country to be entered. So I think that's fantastically valuable, Tianhao. I'm sure that a lot of people will benefit from your wisdom here. So lastly, for our entrepreneur audience who may be finding the going tough right now, do you have some advice to give them so that they too will have the ability to grow their business with the guidance of your expertise?
Having a positive mindset, a right mindset that a solution will always be there. I think that is highly critical. When the going is tough, just remember that there is definitely a solution out there. It is just that you have not met the person who can provide you. So leverage on a network, speak to more people, but more importantly, try and find relevant people who you think can actually provide you the right advice. Because on the contrary, without that, an entrepreneur will just be staying within the shelf, thinking that the problem is too overwhelming to be solved. So if you are doing that yourself, the business is going on a downward trend. That would be my suggestion to anyone who is facing a lot of challenges every day.
Thank you. I think that advice is very valuable, and I'm sure everybody will benefit from your perspective. Thank you, Tianhao, for spending so much time with the scaleupmastery.com audience. The audience and I, thank you.
Thank you, Xian, and thank you, Scale Up Mastery, today for your time and the opportunity you have to share my experience. Thank you very much.